The blood-red sunset painted the Montana Territory sky as Josephine Mills clutched the tattered deed to her father's ranch, the paper shaking between her trembling fingers. Her stepmother's betrayal still burned fresh in her mind like a hot iron against skin, a betrayal that had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken promise. Dakota Territory, 1878. Josephine clutched her satchel tighter as the stagecoach rattled over the uneven trail. 6 days of travel had left her weary, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins, her green eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The letter from her father had arrived just 3 weeks before news of his death pneumonia, they said, leaving his prosperous cattle ranch in the hands of his new wife, Edith. A woman Josephine had never met, having stayed in Boston with her aunt after her mother's death years earlier. Last stop before Willow Creek, the driver called out, his voice barely audible over the creak of wheels and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Josephine straightened her travel-worn blue dress and stared out the window at the vast expanse of prairie. Father's letter had urged her to come, saying he was unwell and wanted her by his side. Now she was arriving too late and with no idea what awaited her. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside a weathered building with a sign that read, Sanders General Store. Josephine gathered her belongings, one trunk, a small satchel, and the remains of her dignity. Boston society had not prepared her for the raw frontier of the Dakota Territory. Need help with that trunk, miss? A stable hand approached as she stepped down from the coach. Yes, please. I need to reach the Mills Ranch. Do you know it? The young man's expression changed. Mills Ranch? You mean the old Mills place? Yes, my father's ranch. James Mills. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Miss, that ranch belongs to the Blackwell Mining Company now. Has for nearly 3 weeks. The ground seemed to shift beneath Josephine's feet. There must be a mistake. My father only just passed. The ranch is my inheritance. Best you speak with Sheriff Dawson, miss. He might know more about it. The sheriff's office was a modest wooden structure at the end of the dusty main street. Sheriff Dawson, a graying man with kind eyes that contradicted his weathered face, listened patiently as Josephine explained her situation. I'm sorry, Miss Mills, he said, removing his hat. Your father's widow sold the ranch to Blackwell Mining. Everything was legal by territorial law. As his wife, she had the right to sell after his passing. But I'm his daughter, his only child. Josephine protested, her voice rising with indignation. The sheriff sighed. Unless he left specific instructions in a will naming you as beneficiary, his property passed to his spouse. That's the law out here. There must be a will. My father was meticulous about such things. If there was, it wasn't filed here. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. Mrs. Mills, your stepmother, she left town the day after the sale. Headed east on the morning coach. Josephine felt the room spinning. Everything she had counted on, the new life she had planned, the connection to the father she barely knew, vanished like morning mist under a harsh sun. Where am I to go now? She whispered, more to herself than the sheriff. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Peterson. Decent place. She might have a room. Josephine nodded numbly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. She would not break down in front of strangers. The Boston Mills family did not show weakness, as her aunt had reminded her countless times. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was clean but sparse, with narrow beds and simple furnishings. The landlady, a plump woman with a no-nonsense attitude, took one look at Josephine's fine clothes and raised an eyebrow. You're not from around here, she stated rather than asked.
No, madam.
I've come from Boston to claim my father's ranch, only to find it's been sold from under me. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened slightly. James Mills was your father?
Yes.
Did you know him? Everyone knew James.
Good man.
That new wife of his was another matter entirely. She shook her head. I've got a room at the back. $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper. Thank you. I'm not sure how long I'll stay. I need to figure out what happened to my father's will. Well, while you're figuring, you might need work. Not many options for a young lady in Willow Creek, but Sampson's Mercantile is looking for help. 3 days later, Josephine stood behind the counter at Sampson's Mercantile, wearing a plain brown dress purchased with her dwindling funds. Mr. Sampson, the proprietor, was fair enough, though his eyes lingered uncomfortably when he thought she wasn't looking. The bell above the door jingled, and Josephine looked up to see a tall man silhouetted against the bright daylight. He stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair and a face tanned by long days under the sun. His clothes were those of a working man, worn boots, dusty trousers, and a faded blue shirt, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Afternoon, he nodded, his eyes a striking blue that reminded Josephine of summer skies in Boston, briefly meeting hers before scanning the store shelves. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you find something? She adopted the polite tone she'd been instructed to use with customers. Need some coffee, flour, and maybe some of that hard candy if you've got it. His voice had a pleasant drawl, not quite southern but definitely not eastern. As Josephine gathered his items, the man leaned against the counter, studying her. You're new here?
Yes.
I arrived earlier this week. Francis Foster, he offered, extending a calloused hand. Most folks call me Frank. She hesitated, then shook it briefly. Josephine Mills. His eyebrows rose slightly. Mills? Any relation to James Mills? He was my father. She measured coffee beans with more concentration than necessary, avoiding his gaze. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Mills. Your father was well respected in these parts. Thank you, Mr. Foster. That will be $1.40. He paid, still watching her with interest. If you don't mind my asking, what brings James Mills's daughter to work at Sampson's counter instead of running his ranch? The question stung. It seems my stepmother sold my father's ranch before I could arrive to claim my inheritance. She's since disappeared, along with any will my father might have left. Frank's expression darkened. To Blackwell Mining, I'd wager. You know of them? Everyone around here knows of Victor Blackwell. He's been buying up every piece of land he can, driving out small ranchers. He gathered his purchases. It's not right. What happened to you, Miss Mills? No, it isn't. But unless I can find my father's will proving he intended the ranch for me, there's little I can do. Frank settled his hat back on his head. Don't be too sure about that. This territory's still finding its way to proper law. Sometimes justice takes different paths out here. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Josephine to wonder about the stranger who seemed troubled by her misfortune. That evening, as Josephine ate Mrs. Peterson's bland stew and cornbread, the landlady settled into the chair across from her. I saw Frank Foster talking to you at Sampson's today, she said casually. Yes, he was buying supplies. Josephine kept her tone neutral. Frank's a good man. Runs the Flying F Ranch about 10 miles west of town. Not the biggest spread, but he works it honest. No wife, though plenty have tried to catch his eye. Josephine wasn't sure why Mrs. Peterson was sharing this information. He seemed to know my father. Most everyone did. Your father was building something special at the Mills Ranch. That's why Blackwell wanted it so badly. The water rights alone are worth a fortune. Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice. People say that stepmother of yours was seen with Victor Blackwell long before your father passed. The implication wasn't lost on Josephine. Are you suggesting foul play in my father's death? Mrs. Peterson shrugged. I'm not suggesting anything, dear. Just saying what folks have whispered. Pneumonia can take a man, sure enough. But a healthy man like James? It raised eyebrows. Sleep eluded Josephine that night as she considered Mrs. Peterson's words. Could her father's death have been something other than natural causes? And what of this will that should have protected her inheritance? The next morning, she was arranging new bolts of fabric when the bell jingled again. This time, it was Sheriff Dawson who entered. "Miss Mills, good morning." He removed his hat, revealing hair flattened by its weight. "I was hoping to have a word." "Of course, Sheriff." She glanced at Mr. Sanson, who nodded his permission. "I've been thinking about your situation," Dawson said as they stepped outside. "There might be a way to contest the sale if we can prove your father intended the ranch for you." Hope flickered within her. "How would we do that?" "Your father's lawyer was a man named Harrison in Fort Pierre. I sent a telegram yesterday asking if he knew of any will. Got a reply this morning saying he did indeed draft one for James about a year ago. Harrison's willing to send a copy, but it'll take time." "That's wonderful news," Josephine exclaimed, then caught herself. "But why are you helping me, Sheriff?" Dawson's weathered face creased into a frown. "Let's just say I don't much care for how Blackwell conducts business. And James Mills was a friend." That evening, a knock at her boarding house door revealed Frank Foster standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "Mr. Foster? What brings you here?" "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Mills. I was wondering if you'd accompany me to your father's to your ranch tomorrow. There might be something there that could help your case." Josephine hesitated. "The property no longer belongs to me. Technically, Blackwell doesn't take possession until the end of the month. The foreman and hands are still there, packing up. I know them worked alongside some before they joined your father. They'd let us look around. Why would you help me? We barely know each other." Frank's blue eyes held steady. "Your father once helped me when I was down on my luck. Let's just say I'm repaying a debt." The next morning, they set out in Frank's wagon. Josephine wore her simplest dress, her hair braided and tucked under a bonnet to shield against the spring sun. As they traveled, the landscape opened up before her, rolling hills covered with prairie grasses, stands of cottonwoods marking creeks and draws. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the vastness. "This is good country," Frank agreed. "Tough in winter, but it gives back what you put into it. Tell me about your ranch." A small smile played at his lips. "The Flying F isn't much compared to some. 400 acres, about 60 head of cattle. I run it with just one hired hand, and my dog, Blue." "And you've been there long?" 5 years now. Came west after the war with nothing but a bedroll and my horse. Your father gave me my first job in these parts." His expression grew distant. "I was in a dark place then. The things I'd seen. Well, James showed me there was still good in the world." Josephine studied his profile. "You fought in the war between the states. Union cavalry. Joined up when I was 17, saw it through to Appomattox." He didn't elaborate further, and something in his tone told her not to press. As they crested a hill, a sprawling ranch came into view. Below them, a large main house with a broad porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and beyond them, rich grassland stretching to distant bluffs. "The Mills Ranch," Frank said softly. Josephine caught her breath. This was what her father had built, what should have been her future. Emotion welled within her, grief for the father she'd barely known, anger at what had been stolen from her. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined from his letters," she whispered. They approached the main house, where a man stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Upon recognizing Frank, he lowered the weapon. "Foster? What brings you out this way?" "Morning, Reynolds. This here is Miss Josephine Mills, James's daughter." The man Reynolds looked stricken. "Miss Mills? We had no idea Mr. Mills had a daughter. Mrs. Mills never mentioned." "I understand," Josephine said, finding her voice. "I've come to see my father's home, if that's permitted." Reynolds nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mississippi. It's still your father's house, far as the hands are concerned. We're packing up, though. Blackwell's men will be here by month's end." Inside, the house was half empty, crates stacked in corners. Josephine moved through the room slowly, touching furniture, running her fingers along the mantelpiece where a few photographs still stood. She picked up one showing a younger version of her father standing proudly before the just-built house. "This was his dream," she said softly. "He talked about you," Reynolds offered, hovering in the doorway. "Said his daughter back east would inherit all this someday. Showed us your letters." "Did he have a study?" "A place where he kept important papers." Reynolds led them to a small room at the back of the house. Most of the contents had been packed, but a large desk remained, its surface cleared. "Mrs. Mills took most of his papers," Reynolds said. "Said she was handling his affairs." Frank began examining the desk, pulling out drawers. "Sometimes men like your father have hiding places for important documents." He ran his hands along the underside of the desk, then checked the sides and back. "There's something here," he murmured, fingers finding a small latch. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth. Frank handed it to Josephine, who unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a document, her father's will, dated just 6 months earlier, leaving the ranch and all its holdings to "my beloved daughter, Josephine Elizabeth Mills." "He didn't forget me," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "No, he didn't," Frank said gently. "And with this, we can fight Blackwell's claim." Reynolds cleared his throat. "Miss Mills, there's something else you should know. The night your father took ill, Mrs. Mills had a visitor, a man who came after dark and left before dawn." "Victor Blackwell?" Frank asked sharply. Reynolds nodded. "And the next morning, Mr. Mills couldn't get out of bed. Doc Simmons said it was pneumonia, but it came on awful sudden-like." Josephine felt a chill. "Are you suggesting my father was murdered?" "I'm not saying nothing for certain, Mississippi. Just that it struck us all as strange. Mr. Mills was healthy as a horse one day, dying the next." Frank's jaw tightened. "We need to get this will to Sheriff Dawson right away." As they prepared to leave, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Frank shaded his eyes, his expression hardening. Blackwell's men. And that's Victor himself leading them. Josephine clutched the will. "What do we do?" "Reynolds, is there a back way out of here?" Frank asked quickly. "Through the barn. There's a trail that cuts through the creek bed. Take Miss Mills that way. I'll deal with Blackwell." "No," Josephine said firmly. "This is my fight too. I won't run." Frank studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me, then." They stepped onto the porch as 5 riders pulled up. The man at their head was expensively dressed, with a silk vest and a watch chain that gleamed in the sun. His dark hair was slicked back, and a meticulously trimmed mustache adorned his upper lip. "Foster," he said coldly, "you're trespassing on private property." "Not yet, I'm not," Frank replied evenly. "Blackwell Mining doesn't take possession until the end of the month." Blackwell's gaze shifted to Josephine. "And who might this be?" "I'm Josephine Mills, James Mills's daughter, and the rightful owner of this ranch." A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwell's face before his expression smoothed. "Ah, Miss Mills. I was unaware James had any children. A pleasure to meet you, though I'm afraid you're mistaken about ownership. I purchased this property legally from Mrs. Edith Mills." "A sale predicated on fraud," Josephine countered, drawing herself up to her full height. "I have my father's will here, leaving everything to me." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "A convenient discovery. However, the sale is complete, the deed transferred. Whatever document you've found is irrelevant now." "The law might see it differently," Frank interjected, "especially when they learn how James Mills died, so suddenly." A dangerous smile played across Blackwell's lips. "Careful, Foster. That sounds dangerously close to an accusation. Take it how you will." Blackwell signaled to his men, who spread out slightly. "I suggest you leave now, both of you. My patience has limits." Frank's hand hovered near his holstered pistol. "We're going. But this isn't over, Blackwell. For your sake, Foster, I hope it is." Blackwell turned his attention back to Josephine. "Miss Mills, I understand your disappointment, but I suggest you accept reality. This territory rewards those strong enough to take what they want." "This territory also believes in justice, Mr. Blackwell," she replied coldly. "And I intend to see it done." They departed through the front gate, Blackwell's men watching their every move. Once they were beyond sight of the ranch, Frank urged the horses to a faster pace. "He'll send men after us," he said grimly. "We need to reach town before they can catch up." "You believe he had my father killed, don't you?" Josephine asked, clutching Will tightly. "I can't prove it. But men like Blackwell, they don't let obstacles stand in their way. And your father was an obstacle to something Blackwell wanted badly." "The water rights Mrs. Peterson mentioned?" Frank nodded. "The Mills Ranch controls the headwaters of Willow Creek. In this country, water is more valuable than gold." They rode hard, taking a less direct route back to town to throw off any pursuers. The sun was low in the sky when they finally reached Willow Creek. Sheriff Dawson was just closing his office when they arrived, breathless and dust-covered. "Sheriff," Frank called out, "we found it. James Mills's will." Dawson ushered them inside, examining the document by lamplight. "This looks legitimate. James's signature, properly witnessed." He looked up at Josephine. "This changes things, Miss Mills. With this, we can challenge Blackwell's purchase." "There's more," Frank said. "We have reason to believe James's death wasn't natural. His ranch hand mentioned a late-night visitor Blackwell the night before James fell ill." Dawson's expression grew grave. "That's a serious accusation, Foster. I'm not making it lightly. We need proof, not just suspicions." The sheriff carefully refolded the will. "I'll keep this in my safe. First thing tomorrow, I'll wire the territorial judge in Yankton. He needs to review this case." "And in the meantime?" Josephine asked. "In the meantime, Miss Mills, you should be careful. Blackwell isn't a man who gives up easily." Frank insisted on walking Josephine back to her boarding house. Night had fallen, and the town was quiet except for the piano music drifting from the saloon. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I wouldn't have found the will without your help. Your father was a good man. He deserved better than what happened to him." Frank hesitated at the boarding house steps. "Blackwell's dangerous, Josephine. He won't take this challenge lying down." "I'm not afraid." A small smile touched his lips. "Maybe you should be, just a little. But I admire your courage. Will I see you tomorrow?"
"Count on it."
"I'll come by the store at closing time." As Josephine prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking not just of the will and her father's ranch, but of Frank Foster's steady presence and the way his blue eyes crinkled when he smiled. In the midst of her troubles, she had found an unexpected ally, perhaps more, if she dared admit it to herself. The next morning brought news that spread through town like wildfire. Victor Blackwell had filed charges against Frank Foster for trespassing and theft of private documents. Sheriff Dawson appeared at Sampson's Mercantile just before noon. "Miss Mills, I need you to come with me. Judge Parker has arrived on the morning stage from Fort Pierre to hear this case immediately." "Judge Parker? I thought you were contacting the territorial judge in Yankton." "I did, but apparently Blackwell has connections. Judge Parker is a circuit judge with jurisdiction here." Dawson lowered his voice. "He's also known to be friendly with mining interests." The town's small courthouse was packed when they arrived. Blackwell sat at one table with a sharp-dressed lawyer beside him. Frank was at the other table, alone and grim-faced. His expression lightened slightly when he saw Josephine. Judge Parker, a corpulent man with jowls that shook when he spoke, called the court to order. "We're here to address multiple issues," he announced. "First, the charge of trespassing and theft against Francis Foster. Second, the validity of a will purportedly signed by James Mills. And third, the legitimacy of the sale of the Mills Ranch to Blackwell Mining Company. Blackwell's lawyer rose first, presenting the signed deed of sale and arguing that even if a will existed, Edith Mills had the legal right as James's widow to sell the property. When it was Frank's turn, he spoke plainly. "Your Honor, James Mills left a valid will naming his daughter as his heir. That will was concealed by Edith Mills, who falsely claimed the right to sell property that wasn't hers to sell." "And where is Mrs. Mills now?" Judge Parker asked. "Gone east, according to reports," Frank replied. "With money obtained fraudulently from Mr. Blackwell." "Fraudulently?" Blackwell's lawyer objected. "My client acted in good faith." The arguments continued, with Sheriff Dawson testifying about the will's discovery and its apparent authenticity. Then Blackwell himself took the stand, offering a smooth account of his business dealings. "I purchased the Mills Ranch legally and in good faith," he insisted. "If Mrs. Mills misrepresented her right to sell, that's unfortunate, but my company has already invested considerable sums in preparation for mining operations." "Mining operations?" Judge Parker inquired. "I was given to understand this was ranch land." "The property has copper deposits, Your Honor. Quite valuable ones. We've already begun preliminary work." Josephine felt her heart sink. If Blackwell had already started mining operations, it would be harder to reverse the sale. When she was called to testify, Josephine straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, my father wrote to me regularly about his ranch and his intentions for me to inherit it upon his death. He never mentioned any mining interests on the property." "Do you have these letters, Miss Mills?" Judge Parker asked. "They were in my trunk, which was stolen from my room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house 2 nights ago." A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was the first Frank had heard of the theft, and his head snapped toward her in concern. "Convenient," muttered Blackwell's lawyer. Judge Parker shuffled through the papers before him. "This is a complicated case requiring more consideration than I can give it today. I'm adjourning until tomorrow morning, when I'll render my decision." He banged his gavel. "In the meantime, Mr. Foster is released on his own recognizance." Outside the courthouse, Frank pulled Josephine aside. "Why didn't you tell me about the stolen letters?" "It happened after you left me at the boarding house that night. I didn't want to worry you when you were already facing charges." She looked away. "Besides, without the will, the letters wouldn't have helped much." "Every piece of evidence matters, Josephine." His voice softened. "Are you all right? Nothing else was taken. Just the letters and a photograph of my father. Nothing of real value." Frank's expression darkened. "It had value to Blackwell, proof of your relationship with your father." Sheriff Dawson joined them, his face troubled. "Just heard Judge Parker is dining with Blackwell tonight at the hotel. I don't like it." "He's going to rule against us, isn't he?" Josephine asked quietly. "It's likely," Dawson admitted. "Blackwell has influence, and even with the will, there are legal complexities. Edith was James's legal wife. So I've lost everything?" Her voice quavered despite her efforts to remain strong. Frank took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Not everything. Not yet." That evening, as Josephine sat alone in her boarding house room, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Frank standing there, his expression determined. "Pack what you can carry," he said without preamble. "We're leaving." "Leaving? What are you talking about?" "Blackwell's men are watching the boarding house. If Judge Parker rules against you tomorrow, and Blackwell won't stop there. He can't risk you pursuing this further." Fear flickered within her. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's not the type to leave loose ends. Reynolds, your father's foreman, was found beaten nearly to death this afternoon. The message is clear. Anyone who helps you is in danger." Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. "Because of me? Because of Blackwell and his greed?" Frank's blue eyes were intense in the lamplight. I have a place where you'll be safe until we can figure out our next move. Our next move? Frank, I can't ask you to risk yourself for me. You didn't ask. I'm offering. He stepped closer. Your father once saved me when I had nothing. Let me help his daughter now. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. Where would we go? My ranch. It's remote enough that Blackwell's men won't find us easily. But your cattle, your livelihood, mean nothing if I can't look at myself in the mirror each morning. He took her hands in his. Josephine, I know we've only just met, but I believe your father would want me to help you. And I want to help you. The sincerity in his voice dissolved her reservations. All right, give me 10 minutes to pack. They slipped out through the back door of the boarding house, where Frank had saddle horses waiting. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light to see by without making them easy targets. They rode hard for the first hour, taking little-used trails through the hills. When they finally slowed to rest the horses, Josephine broke the silence. Tell me about the Flying F. What's it like? A genuine smile crossed Frank's face. It's nothing grand, not like your father's place. The house is small, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. But the land is good. Rich grass in the valley, natural springs that never run dry. In the evening, when the sun sets behind the western ridge, it paints the whole valley gold. It sounds wonderful, she said softly. It is. It's the first place that ever felt like home to me. He looked at her in the moonlight. What about you? Was Boston home? I lived there, but I'm not sure it was ever home. My aunt raised me after my mother died, but she was strict. Proper society was everything to her. Josephine looked out at the vast, star-filled sky. Out here, everything feels possible in a way it never did back east. They reached the Flying F just before dawn. The ranch was indeed modest compared to her father's, but there was a care to it that spoke of pride and hard work. A small house with a covered porch stood in a clearing, surrounded by cottonwoods. Beyond it were a barn, corral, and bunkhouse. An older man emerged from the bunkhouse as they approached, shotgun in hand. Upon recognizing Frank, he lowered the weapon. Hank, Frank called out. Everything all right? Quiet as a church, boss. Hank's curious gaze settled on Josephine. This the Mills girl I've been hearing about? This is Miss Josephine Mills, Frank confirmed, helping her dismount. She'll be staying with us for a while. Josephine, this is Hank Mercer, my right hand and the only man I trust with my life.
Hank tipped his hat.
Madam, sorry about your father. He was a good man. Thank you, Josephine said, finding she was too exhausted for more words. Frank led her to the house, lighting a lamp that revealed a simple but clean interior. You can take the bedroom. I'll bunk in the lean-to. I can't put you out of your own bed. You're not. I insist. His tone brooked no argument. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. Try to get some sleep. We've got a lot to figure out come morning. Alone in Frank's bedroom, Josephine finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back. The room smelled of him leather, pine soap, and something indefinably male. She washed her face in the basin, then curled up on the bed, still fully dressed. Despite her turmoil, exhaustion claimed her quickly. She awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the window, telling her it was well into morning. She smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could and ventured out to the main room. Frank stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to a skillet of eggs. He'd changed into a clean shirt, his suspenders hanging at his sides. Something about the domestic scene made her heart flutter unexpectedly. Good morning, she said softly. He turned, a smile warming his features. You slept.
Good.
Hungry. Starving, actually. She moved to the small table where 2 plates were already set. Have you heard any news from town? His expression sobered. Hank rode in at first light. Judge Parker ruled in Blackwell's favor, as expected. The will was deemed authentic, but insufficient to override the sale, since Edith was legally entitled to dispose of communal property. Josephine's appetite faded. So it's over. They sold my land. Not necessarily. Frank set a plate of eggs and bacon before her. Eat first, then we'll talk. After breakfast, they sat on the porch, coffee cups in hand. The morning was cool, with dew still glistening on the grass. I've been thinking about your situation, Frank began. There's still one angle we haven't explored. Which is your father's death. If it wasn't natural if Blackwell and your stepmother conspired to murder him, then the sale of the ranch was not just fraudulent, but part of a criminal conspiracy. Hope flared briefly. But how could we prove that now? Father's been buried for weeks. There's a doctor in Fort Pierre who specializes in such matters. If we could get an exhumation order. He trailed off at her expression. I know it's unpleasant to consider. It's not just that.
It's...
Josephine set down her cup. Even if we could prove it, what then? Blackwell has already begun mining operations. The ranch won't be the same. True. But justice for your father would count for something. And financial compensation could give you a new start. She studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the hint of stubble that hadn't been there the day before. Why are you doing all this, Frank? The truth. He met her gaze directly. At first, it was for your father's sake. He gave me work when others wouldn't hire a broken soldier. He saw something in me worth salvaging when I couldn't see it myself. Frank's voice softened.
But now...
Now it's for you, Josephine. Because I see in you the same strength and goodness I saw in him. And because the thought of Blackwell winning of him hurting you makes me want to tear him apart with my bare hands. The raw emotion in his voice sent a shiver through her. You barely know me. I know enough. His hand found hers on the porch rail. I know you're brave and determined. I know you loved your father despite the distance between you. I know you deserve justice. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Josephine squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. They spent the day planning their next move. Frank sent Hank to Fort Pierre with a letter for the doctor, explaining the situation and requesting his expertise. Josephine wrote down everything she could remember about her father's letters regarding his health before his sudden illness. As evening approached, Frank grew restless, checking the horizon frequently. Hank should have been back by now. Could he have been delayed? Possibly, but... Frank frowned. Something doesn't feel right. His instincts proved correct when the sound of approaching horses broke the twilight stillness, not one rider, but several. Frank grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Get inside, he ordered, his voice tight. Frank, now, Josephine. And stay away from the windows. She retreated into the house, heart pounding. Through a crack in the curtains, she saw 5 riders approach Blackwell at their head, with Hank slumped over his saddle, hands bound. Foster. Blackwell called out. I know you're harboring the Mills woman. Send her out now. And maybe your man here lives to see morning. Frank stood on the porch, rifle ready, but not yet aimed. Let Hank go, Blackwell. Your quarrel's with me. My quarrel is with anyone who interferes with my business. Blackwell's voice was cold. The judge has ruled. The Mills ranch belongs to me, legally and rightfully. I won't have some Boston socialite stirring up trouble about her father's unfortunate passing. So, you admit it wasn't natural causes? Frank pressed. Blackwell laughed. I admit nothing. But I do know that accidents befall those who pry into matters that don't concern them. Just ask your man here. He had quite a fall on his way to Fort Pierre. Hank's face was bloodied, his left eye swollen shut. But he managed to catch Frank's gaze and give an almost imperceptible nod. Josephine couldn't bear to watch any longer. She stepped onto the porch, ignoring Frank's sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Blackwell," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "If it's me you want, here I am. Let Mr. Mercer go." Blackwell smiled, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. "Miss Mills, how gracious of you to join us. I simply want your assurance that you'll be leaving the territory
Tonight.
without further disruption to my business affairs. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid the situation becomes most unpleasant for everyone involved." His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. Frank moved to stand slightly in front of her, his body tense with readiness. "You won't touch her, Blackwell." "No? And who's going to stop me? You, against 5 of my men? Those aren't favorable odds, Foster." What happened next unfolded with startling speed. Hank, apparently not as weakened as he'd appeared, suddenly kicked his horse and drove it hard into Blackwell's mount. In the same instant, Frank shoved Josephine back into the doorway and fired his rifle, hitting one of Blackwell's men in the shoulder. Chaos erupted as horses reared and men shouted. Gunshots cracked through the air. Frank fired again, then dragged Josephine fully inside, slamming the door. "The back window," he said urgently. "There's a route through the creek bed that leads to the hills. Take my horse he saddled in the barn and ride hard for Sheriff Dawson's place." "I'm not leaving you here." Panic edged her voice. "You have to." He pressed his pistol into her hands. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. Hank and I have prepared for something like this." More gunfire peppered the front of the house, with splintering as bullets found their mark. Frank pushed Josephine toward the back room. "Go. Now." Heart racing, she slipped through the back window and ran crouched to the barn. Frank's horse, a sturdy bay gelding, was indeed saddled and waiting. She mounted quickly, the pistol clutched tightly in one hand. As she guided the horse out the back of the barn, a figure loomed suddenly in the shadows. She raised the pistol, finger tightening on the trigger, before recognizing Hank's weathered face. "This way, miss," he whispered, pointing toward a narrow trail barely visible in the gathering darkness. "Follow the creek south. Don't stop for nothing." But Frank, he can handle himself. Been in worse scrapes than this. Despite his reassurance, blood trickled down the side of Hank's face.
"Go on now."
Quick and quiet. Josephine hesitated only a moment longer, then nudged the horse forward. The sound of gunfire continued behind her, punctuated by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. It took every ounce of her will not to turn back. The trail followed a shallow creek that wound through stands of cottonwood and willow. The horse moved surely, familiar with the path even in the dim light. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 30 minutes, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast from behind. Panic seized her. She urged the horse to greater speed, searching desperately for a place to hide. The pistol felt heavy in her hand as she prepared to defend herself. "Josephine." The voice that called out was Frank's, not Blackwell's. Relief flooded through her as she reined in, turning to see Frank galloping toward her, blood staining his left sleeve, but otherwise intact. "Frank, you're hurt." "It's nothing, just a graze." He pulled his horse alongside hers. Blackwell's men retreated. One dead, one wounded. Blackwell himself took a bullet in the leg. And Hank, holding the ranch. "He'll be fine." Frank's expression was grim. "But they'll be back, with more men. We need to reach town and Sheriff Dawson before they regroup." They rode hard through the night, taking back trails and deer paths to avoid the main road, where Blackwell's men might be watching. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Willow Creek, the town just stirring to life. Sheriff Dawson was already at his office, as if expecting them. His eyebrows rose at their disheveled appearance and Frank's blood-stained shirt. "I was wondering when you two would show up," he said, ushering them inside. "Word reached me last night about gunfire out at the Flying F." Frank quickly explained the confrontation with Blackwell. He's crossed the line, Sheriff. Attempted murder at the very least. Dawson nodded grimly. I'd say so. And there's more you should know. A telegram came yesterday from the U.S. Marshal's office in Yankton. They've been building a case against Victor Blackwell for land fraud across 3 territories. Your situation with the Mills Ranch caught their attention. Hope flickered within Josephine. Does that mean they'll help us? It means they're sending a marshal, due on today's stage. More importantly, they've uncovered evidence that Blackwell has been bribing officials, including Judge Parker. Dawson's expression hardened. The judge skipped town last night. Left a very interesting confession on my desk. Frank leaned forward. What kind of confession? The kind that says Edith Mills approached Blackwell about selling the ranch before James was even in the ground, and that Blackwell paid Judge Parker to rule in his favor regardless of the evidence. Dawson looked directly at Josephine. It doesn't prove your father was murdered, Miss Mills, but it does invalidate the sale of the ranch. Tears of relief and joy sprang to Josephine's eyes. I mean the Mills Ranch is rightfully yours, as your father intended. Dawson smiled. Though given Blackwell's current disposition, I'd suggest you both stay in town until the marshal arrives. You can use the room above my office. Later, as Josephine washed the dust from her face in the small basin Dawson had provided, Frank leaned against the doorframe watching her, his wounded arm now properly bandaged. You should get some rest, he said softly. It's been a long night. So should you. She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how alone they were. Frank, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. He took a step closer, his blue eyes intense. You don't need to thank me, Josephine. I didn't do it for gratitude. Why did you do it then? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Another step, closing the distance between them. Because from the moment I saw you standing behind that counter at Sampson's, trying to be brave when your world had fallen apart, something in me recognized something in you. His hand came up to gently touch her cheek. Something that felt like coming home. The tenderness in his touch undid her last defenses. Josephine leaned into his hand, her eyes meeting his. I felt it too. Even with everything happening, I felt safe with you. Like I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. Frank's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Josephine answered by tilting her face up to his. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, before deepening with a hunger that matched her own awakening desire. When they finally parted, both breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. I know it's too soon. We barely know each other, and you've been through so much. It's not too soon, she whispered. Some things you just know, even when they make no logical sense. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way she had come to adore. I promised myself I wouldn't rush you. You're not rushing me. If anything, I'm rushing you. She returned his smile, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. But you're right, we should rest. There's still Blackwell to deal with. They slept most of the day, exhaustion claiming them both. By evening, news had spread through town that Blackwell and his remaining men had been seen heading north, apparently fleeing before the marshal's arrival. The marshal himself, a tall, stern-faced man named Jensen, arrived on the afternoon stage. After lengthy discussions with Sheriff Dawson and taking statements from both Frank and Josephine, he confirmed what Dawson had already told them. The sale of the Mills Ranch was invalid. Miss Mills, Marshal Jensen said, once the paperwork is processed in Yankton, the ranch will be legally returned to you. As for Blackwell, we'll catch up to him. Men like that always make mistakes when they're running scared. 2 days later, with the marshal gone in pursuit of Blackwell and immediate danger past, Josephine and Frank stood on the porch of what was once again the Mills Ranch. The afternoon sun bathed the buildings and rolling pastures in golden light. It's hard to believe it's really mine, Josephine said softly. After everything that happened. Your father would be proud of how you fought for it. Frank's arms slipped around her waist, a gesture that had quickly become familiar and cherished. She leaned into him. I couldn't have done it without you. You're stronger than you know, Josephine Mills. He pressed a kiss to her temple. So, what happens now? Will you stay and run the ranch? It was the question that had been lingering between them, unasked until now. Josephine turned in his arms to face him. I want to stay. I want to build something here like my father did. She took a deep breath. But I don't know the first thing about ranching. I'd need someone to teach me. A slow smile spread across Frank's face. I might know someone who could help with that. Oh? And what would this person want in return for such valuable instruction? Frank's expression grew serious, though his eyes still held their warmth. Just the chance to be by your side, day in and day out. To build a life with you if you'll have him. Josephine's heart swelled. Frank Foster, are you proposing to me? I know it's sudden. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her newfound feelings into it. When they parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes? He asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Yes, she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. I don't have much to offer compared to all this. He gestured at the ranch surrounding them. The Flying F is a modest spread. Josephine took his hands in hers. They sold me for my land, she said softly. My stepmother, Blackwell, they saw me as nothing but an obstacle to what they wanted. Frank's jaw tightened. They were fools. Perhaps. But you, her voice caught with emotion. You were willing to give up everything to help me get my land back. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. She smiled up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. I know. That's why I love you, Frank Foster. Not for what you have, but for who you are. His arms tightened around her. And I love you, Josephine Mills. More than I thought possible. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We could combine the ranches, you know. The Mills Foster Ranch has a nice ring to it. Frank chuckled, the sound rumbling beneath her ear. I like that, though most folks will just call it ours. Ours, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I like that even better. As the sun began to set over the land that was now truly hers, Josephine felt a sense of peace and rightness she had never known before. Her father had built this place with dreams of it becoming her legacy. Now, with Frank beside her, she would honor that legacy and create one of their own. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Josephine Mills became Josephine Foster in a ceremony on the front porch of the newly christened Mills Foster Ranch. Sheriff Dawson officiated, while Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Sanson, and the combined ranch hands of both properties looked on with approval. You may kiss your bride, Dawson announced with a broad smile. Frank needed no further encouragement, sweeping Josephine into an embrace that drew cheers and whistles from their assembled friends. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the barn, decorated with wildflowers and lanterns for the occasion. As the evening waned, the newlyweds slipped away to the main house, now their home. On the porch, under a canopy of stars, Frank pulled Josephine close. Happy, Mrs. Foster? Completely, Mr. Foster. She smiled up at him. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If you hadn't been in Samson's that day, if I hadn't found my father's will. I try not to dwell on might-have-beens, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I do believe some things are meant to be, no matter what path gets you there. Like us. Exactly like us. He kissed her softly. Your father once told me something I never forgot. He said, the land endures, and so do the people who love it enough to fight for it. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. That sounds like him. He'd be proud of you, Josephine. Of what you've built here. What we've built, she corrected, lacing her fingers with his. Together. Frank smiled, leading her toward the door of their home. Together, he agreed. Always. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the room where Josephine had once found her father's will, the document that had changed the course of her life. Now, that room was part of their shared life, filled with both her father's treasures and new ones they had chosen together. On the mantel stood a photograph of Josephine and Frank on their wedding day, standing before the ranch house with the vast Dakota sky behind them. Beside it was the older photograph of her father that had survived the journey from Boston. As Josephine gazed at these mementos, Frank's arms encircled her from behind. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Foster." She leaned back against his solid warmth. "I was just thinking that my father would approve. Of you, of us, of everything we're building." "I think so too." His lips brushed her temple. "And I promise you this, Josephine, I'll spend every day making sure you never regret choosing this life with me." She turned in his arms, her heart full to overflowing with love for this man who had risked everything for her. "I could never regret it. You gave me back my land, but more importantly, you gave me a home.
A real loma.
And you gave me something I never thought I'd find after the war." His voice grew husky with emotion. "A reason to believe in the future again." As they stood there in the firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The land had brought them together, her father's legacy and Frank's devotion to it, but what would keep them together was something far more precious, a love born in adversity and tempered by shared dreams. "I love you, Frank Foster," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you, Josephine Foster," he replied, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight and something infinitely more enduring. "Until the stars fall from the sky." Outside, the night wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Josephine and Frank began the first night of their shared forever on land that was truly, finally, irrevocably theirs. 1 year later, the Mills Foster Ranch had prospered beyond even their most optimistic expectations. The merger of Frank's cattle operation with Josephine's larger spread had created one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Word had reached them last month that Victor Blackwell had been captured in Montana and was awaiting trial for multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, justice delayed, but not denied. On a warm spring evening, Josephine stood on the porch watching the sunset, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. 5 months along with their first child, she felt a contentment that once seemed impossible during those desperate days when she had first arrived in Dakota Territory. The sound of hoofbeats announced Frank's return from checking the north pasture. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, tipping his hat back as he approached. "Beautiful evening," he commented, climbing the steps to stand beside her. His hand joined hers over their unborn child. "How are my treasures today?" "We're well," she smiled up at him. "Your son has been particularly active." "Or daughter," Frank reminded her with a grin. "Either way, that child is going to be as strong-willed as its mother." "Heaven help us if that's true." She leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I had a letter from Aunt Eleanor today. She's finally accepted our invitation to visit after the baby comes." Frank raised an eyebrow. "The formidable Boston aunt is willing to brave the uncivilized wilderness, as she called it?" Apparently the prospect of a grandnephew or niece has softened her stance on the territories. Josephine laughed. "Though she still asks if we have proper plumbing." "Well, the new pump in the kitchen should impress her," Frank chuckled, then grew more serious. "Are you happy, Josie? Truly happy with this life?" It was a question he rarely asked anymore, secure in their love but occasionally visited by the old insecurity that she might miss her former life in Boston society. Josephine turned fully toward him, framing his face with her hands. "Francis Foster, I have never been happier in my life than I am right here, with you on our land." The smile that lit his face was worth more to her than all the drawing rooms and tea parties of her former life. He bent to kiss her, a kiss that still held all the promise and passion of their first. "What do you think about James for a boy?" she asked when they parted. "After my father." "James Foster." Frank nodded approvingly. "A good, strong name. And for a girl, perhaps Elizabeth?" "After my mother." "Elizabeth Foster." His hand moved gently over her rounded belly. "Either way, this child will know they are loved. And they'll know the story of how their parents found each other." Josephine smiled. How a brave cowboy stepped up when a stranger was in trouble. How a courageous woman fought for what was rightfully hers, Frank corrected. And how together, they built something neither could have created alone. As the last rays of sunlight gilded the prairie grass and distant hills, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened, displaced young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach to the confident ranch mistress and soon-to-be mother she had become. The land had been her birthright, but this life, this love, was what she had chosen. "I love you, Frank," she said simply, words that never lost their meaning no matter how often she spoke them. "And I love you, Josephine," he replied, his arms strong around her. "Every day more than the last." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the love that had blossomed against all odds on the wild Dakota frontier. The Mills Foster Ranch spread out before them, cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures, crops growing in the fields, a legacy being built for generations to come. They had fought for this land, this life, this love. And in the end, they had created something far more precious than either had imagined possible when fate first brought them together, a home where both their hearts could truly belong.